Picture a ridgeline in the autumn of 1780. It is cold, and the rain has not stopped for 2 days. Somewhere along the border between the two Carolinas, 900 men are climbing a wooded slope with long rifles wrapped in oilcloth to keep the powder dry. They have come on horseback from the far side of the mountains, and most of them answer to only a handful of names. Campbell, Shelby, Sevier, Cleveland. Not one of them wears a uniform. Not one of them was ordered here by any government. They have come because a British officer sent word that he would march over the mountains and hang their leaders and lay their country waste. And these are not men who take a threat like that lying down. Within the hour, they will surround a loyalist force on a hill called King's Mountain and destroy it. 2 centuries earlier, the great-great-grandfathers of these same men were cattle raiders on the bloodiest frontier in Britain, riding under those very surnames. And your name may be waiting in this list. To understand how a border raider became an American revolutionary, you have to begin with a stretch of ground that most people who carry these names have never heard of. Ulster, the northern province of Ireland. In the early 1600s, King James VI of Scotland, who had just become James I of England, was looking at 2 problems at the same time. The first was Ulster itself, freshly emptied of its rebel Gaelic lords and, in the language of the crown, ripe for plantation. The second was the border country between his 2 kingdoms, 3 centuries of cattle raiding and blood feud and lawlessness that the joining of the 2 crowns was supposed to bring to an end. His solution was brutal, and it was tidy. He would pacify the border by breaking up the great riding families and shipping the most troublesome of them across the narrow channel to Ulster, where their hardness could be put to work holding down a hostile countryside. So they came. Lowland Scots from Galloway and the borders, joined by English settlers out of the northern counties, perhaps 200,000 of them across the whole of the 1600s. By the early 1700s, the British population of Ulster had passed 250,000. They were mostly Presbyterian, stubborn in their faith, and from the very beginning, they were treated as second-class subjects in the land they had been sent to hold. They were made to pay tithes to a church that was not their own. Under the Test Act of 1704, a Presbyterian was shut out of public office, and for a time, even his marriages were treated as doubtful in the eyes of the law. The Crown had used these people to keep the land, and then it refused to let them rise on it. Then the rents climbed, the harvests failed, the linen trade faltered, and they moved again. They did not trickle out. They came in waves, and historians count 5 great ones. In 1717, in the late 1720s, in the early 1740s, in the middle 1750s, and in the early 1770s, each one driven by drought, by grasping landlords, or by plain hunger. Between 1717 and the American Revolution, somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 Ulster folk crossed the Atlantic. They landed mostly at Philadelphia and at Charleston, found the good coastal land already taken by the English, and did what their people had always done. They pushed inland, up the great wagon road into the back country, and then up into the mountains that nobody else wanted. The historian David Hackett Fisher, in his book Albion's Seed, called them one of the 4 great folk migrations that shaped America. The people of the British borderlands who settled the southern back country and gave it its accent, its music, its fierce independence, and its surnames. That last gift is the one we are here for. One last thing before the countdown. You are going to hear the prefixes Mac and Mac again and again, and they mean the very same thing. Son of. MacDonald is son of Donald. McKinley is son of Finley. The spelling shifts from one census page to the next. The apostrophe comes and goes. The doubled letters double and undouble. And all of it is simply the residue of clerks writing down Gaelic sounds in English letters. Keep that in mind as we go. The spelling of your name may have changed a dozen times on the road down to you, and the name that feels ordinary on your mailbox today may be a riding surname worn smooth by 300 years of American courthouses. Now, watch for your own name. Number 14, Armstrong. If the border ever had a first family, this was it. The Armstrongs held the West March and the debatable land, that strip of contested ground that belonged to neither kingdom, and at their height they could put 3,000 riders in the saddle. They were feared on both sides of the line. They rode in quilted jackets and the flat steel helmets that gave the whole raver world its nickname, the steel bonnets. When a raided man wanted his cattle back, he could raise what was called the hot trod, a legal pursuit with a burning turf carried on a lance, and ride armed into the other kingdom to take them back. In about 1530, the most famous of them all, Johnny Armstrong of Gilnockie, rode out to meet the young King James V under a flag of truce, and was hanged on the spot with his men. It was a betrayal the border never forgot. When the crown finally cracked down, Armstrongs were among the families scattered to Ulster, and from Ulster they came to America, in their thousands, into Pennsylvania, down into Virginia, and on into the Tennessee hills. 3.5 centuries after Gilnockie, a quiet Ohio man whose people traced back to that same border stock, stepped off a ladder onto the surface of the moon. His name was Neil Armstrong. Number 13, Graham. The Grahams were the terror of the western border, packed into the debatable land alongside the Armstrongs, and when James set out to pacify the frontier, no name suffered worse. The crown did not simply relocate the Grahams, it tried to erase them. Hundreds were rounded up and transported, some to the Low Countries, many to Ireland, and a few were ordered never to use the name Graham again. They used it anyway. The name rode out the centuries, crossed to Ulster, crossed to America, and planted itself all across the southern mountains. And you can hear two Reaver names knotted together in the man who patented the telephone, the Edinburgh-born inventor Alexander Graham Bell. Graham and Bell, two border surnames sitting in a single signature. Number 12, Elliot and Kerr. Deep in Liddesdale, the most lawless glen on the whole frontier, rode the Elliots, a hard and numerous clan whose name still fills the valleys of the Scottish borders today. The old families spelled it a dozen ways, and the single T, single L form is said to carry the oldest Liddesdale pedigree. Beside them in the middle march rode the Kerrs, who along with the Scots were the leading riding family of their country, and who supplied warden after warden to keep an order they themselves were happy to break. There is a tradition that the Kerrs were left-handed, and that they built the spiral staircases of their towers to wind the wrong way, so that a left-handed swordsman could defend them coming down. Whether or not that is true, the Kerrs were among the most active reavers on the line, and the name traveled the same hard road as all the rest, through Ulster and into the American backcountry. Number 11, Bell and Johnston. The Bells were an Annandale riding family, allied and feuding by turns across the West March, and theirs is one of the most common surnames in the southern mountains to this day. The Johnstons, sometimes written with a final E, were a power in their own right, and their feud with the Maxwells was the longest and bloodiest in all of border history, a vendetta that burned for generations and left the record soaked in it. Both names planted deep in Ulster. Both names crossed the water, and if your family spells it Johnston, or Johnstone, or simply Johnson, you may be looking at a riding surname worn smooth by 300 years of American clerks. Number 10, Campbell. Here the story turns, and honesty matters. Campbell is not a border name. The Campbells were the great Highland clan of Argyll, lords of Inverary, the most powerful kindred in the Western Highlands, and their world of sea lochs and glens was a long way from the cattle paths of the border. But the Plantation of Ulster did not draw only on the lowlands. A large body of Highland Scots crossed over as well, especially out of Argyll and the Southern Isles, and they carried their names with them. Campbell became one of the most common surnames in Ulster, and one of the most common the Scots-Irish carried to America. Genealogists who study Scots-Irish descent today find that better than a third of the families trace to Highland rather than lowland roots, and Campbell and MacDonald sit right at the top of that Highland list. So when you meet a mountain Campbell, you are not meeting a river. You are meeting the Highlands, folded into the Ulster stream and carried west with everyone else. Number 9, the Mac and Mac names, and the feud that made two of them famous. Across the whole Scots-Irish world, you find the patronymics: McClellan, McConnell, McDowell, McKinley, McCandless, McCormick, and McCoy. That last one, McCoy, comes from the Gaelic meaning son of Hugh, and it is a cousin of the Highland name Mackay. It would have stayed an ordinary backcountry name if not for what happened along one muddy river. The feud ran along the Tug Fork that divides Kentucky from West Virginia, between the family of Randolph McCoy and the family of William Anderson Hatfield, the man they called Devil Anse. It is usually said to have caught fire in 1878 over a hog. Randolph McCoy claimed that a pig in a Hatfield pen was his, marked with McCoy notches on its ear, and when a Hatfield justice of the peace ruled against him, the bitterness set hard. Then came a doomed romance between Rosanna McCoy and Devil Anse's son Johns, a backwoods Romeo and Juliet that ended when Johns abandoned her. On an election day in August of 1882, 3 of Randolph's sons stabbed Devil Anse's brother Ellison many times over and shot him, and the Hatfields answered by tying the 3 young men to bushes and executing them. The worst night came on the 1st of January, 1888, when a Hatfield party surrounded the McCoy cabin, set it ablaze, and shot down 2 more of Randolph's children as they ran. More than a dozen people died before it ended. And there is a quiet irony in those 2 names. McCoy is Gaelic to the bone, son of Hugh. Hatfield is an Old English place name, the heath and the open field. The most famous feud in Appalachian history married the Gaelic world to the English one, which is exactly what the backcountry always did. In 2003, around 60 descendants of both families signed a symbolic truce, 138 years after the first blood was spilled. Number 8. Wallace, Crawford, and Patterson. These are the workhorses, the names that fill the Ulster muster rolls and the Appalachian census pages without ever making the legends. Wallace comes from an old word meaning foreigner, the same root as the word Welsh, and it marked the ancient Britons of Strathclyde, who held out in the southwest of Scotland. Its most famous bearer needs no introduction, the freedom fighter Sir William Wallace, killed in 1305. Crawford is a place name, from the lands of that name in Lanarkshire, and it rode the border edges before it rode to Ulster. And Patterson is simply son of Patrick, which became one of the steadiest and most widespread of all the Ulster Scots names. All 3 appear by the dozen on the 17th century Ulster muster rolls, the lists of fighting men every estate was made to keep, long before they ever reached a Carolina courthouse or a Tennessee deed book. None of the 3 is glamorous. All 3 are everywhere in the mountains. And if yours is one of them, you are standing in the main current of this migration, not out at its edges. If this is the kind of history you want more of, take a second to subscribe. We trace the bloodlines and the surnames of the Anglosphere every week, and there is a great deal more frontier still to cover. Number 7. Montgomery. Here is a name with a longer pedigree than most of the writers on this list. The Montgomerys were a Norman family who came into Britain in the wake of 1066, and by the 1500s, they were a great Ayrshire house on the Scottish coast, looking across the water at Ulster. And it was a Montgomery who helped begin the whole story. In 1606, 2 years before the official plantation, Hugh Montgomery struck a private bargain that brought lowland Scots across to settle County Down, in what some historians call the first true Scots settlement of Ulster. So the Montgomerys were not just carried along by the migration. In a real sense, they opened the gate for it. The name crossed to America with all the rest, spread through the backcountry, and stamped itself onto the map. There is a Montgomery County in more than a dozen American states, and the capital of Alabama carries the name to this day. When you see it on a courthouse or a road sign, you are looking at a Norman house that helped set the Ulster stream in motion. Number 6. Stewart and Stewart. Think for a moment about the strangeness of this one. The name began as a job. A steward was the official who managed a great lord's household and lands, and the High Stewards of Scotland held that office so long that it hardened into a surname. Then, in 1371, a Stewart took the throne itself, and for more than 3 centuries the royal house of Scotland, and later of all Britain, bore this name. The spelling Stewart, with a U, is often said to come down through Mary, Queen of Scots, and her time in France, where the French alphabet had no comfortable W. But alongside the kings there were countless ordinary Stuarts, and the border Stuarts of the Scottish marches were reivers like everyone else around them. They crossed to Ulster, they crossed to America, and they scattered through the mountains in their thousands. Remember Davy Crockett's own grandmother, an Ulster Scot named Sarah Stewart. So the name you might picture on a throne was, far more often, the name over a cabin door in the Tennessee hills. A royal house and a frontier family, sharing one worn old word for the man who ran the household. Number 5. Crockett. Everyone knows the line. King of the wild frontier, dead at the Alamo in 1836. David Crockett was born on the Nolichucky River, in what is now Greene County, Tennessee, in 1786, deep in the heart of the Scots-Irish backcountry. But the Crockett name itself has a surprising root, and it is worth telling straight. It began in France as Crocketania, a Huguenot family of Protestants who fled Catholic persecution. They settled in Ulster like so many others, and there they married into the Ulster Scots around them. Davy's own ancestor married Sarah Stewart, that Ulster Scot from County Donegal. By the time the family reached Tennessee, the French origin was a faint memory, and the family was Scots-Irish in everything but the spelling of its name. Davy himself rose from a hardscrabble cabin all the way to the United States Congress, where he broke with